Hello, SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded. In my comments, and I had a couple of email requests asking about this movie, the movie Great Pyramid K2019. Well, okay, we'll go through it, but first, after having viewed it, essentially it's a work of sophistry. It's about poisoning the well, and it's just it uses emotive arguments. It sets up false narratives, and then to undermine and create a sort of sense of doubt, and then create a problem and then find a solution to it. And this is the issue. They're looking for problems where there already are solutions, and it's very emotive, and in many cases, like either very, very, very badly researched or intentionally deceptive. But for instance, I'll begin with, after initial appeal, about 7 minutes in, it begins. But the history of mankind, as it is written in books, is wrong. So it's setting up this case. But so I'm technically poisoning the well now, but we want to go through this, and so I'm just establishing what my point is now. Actually, just about everything that you'll see in this documentary is wrong. In many cases, it is so wrong as to require a new word for wrong. And just to point out that the 20-minute mark, they use the Benny Hill gambit and use the Yakety Sax soundtrack, so it's fair game. If they want it, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And they use a lot of mocking and that as well, so fair game. All right, now sophistry. These are the definitions I'll be using. So sophistry is the use of clever but false arguments, especially with the intention of deceiving or poisoning the well. Is a type of informal fallacy where adverse information about a target is preemptively presented to an audience with the intention of discrediting or ridiculing something that the target person is about to say. Poisoning the well, also called the smear tactic, is a rhetorical technique and logical fallacy that uses association of negative emotions too. So this is what this comes down to, and the facts that they present are like, again, not even wrong. It's on a new scale of wrongness. So it's interesting because the main thrust of this documentary is that the stones were not cut, but they were formed using geopolymer. And it's interesting that that'll be in the later parts. But first, we'll look at the setup where they undermine your belief, essentially, and it's like, well, this is impossible. That can't. How did they do this? What's the solution? What's the and the again, for anyone interested, they should be able to find these things. So again, it's very bad research, but I would say deliberate. The way it's structured, the emotions they invoke, it is deliberate. So they show pictures, and these early pictures of a pyramid just thoroughly discredit their main thrust. But let's first go. So they begin with the issue of lifting, and they talk about the granite that can be found in the King's Chamber in that area, and they mention the granite. So technically true, free-loaded semis, as we call them, tractor trailers. Now, there are heavier ones, but you can pick, would be free. You can find heavier lifting trucks, but it's setting up this. Well, how can this be lifted? It's impossible, but I want to do a devoted video on this, so especially talking about the Unfinished Obelisk at Azwan. But the Egyptians had sail ships. To sail a ship, you need mechanical advantage, rope tying techniques. So, for instance, here bottom left, you see a trucker's hitch. That's used in camping to tighten tents, for instance. It's used in sailing. This simple knot is actually a compound pulley system. This compound pulley system is still the basis for all modern lifting equipment now. It's essentially using a rope to make a crane. So without sail knowledge, there is no lifting. And I'll do a dedicated one, but just to point, like the Egyptians were sailing, you need mechanical advantage and that knowledge to operate sail ships. So it's just point blank. But this is a common trope. So we're going to talk about the distance from the Azwan granite quarries to the Giza Plateau. Technically, it is true the granite was brought from Azwan, and it did travel 900 kilometers or 600 miles to get to the Giza Plateau. So technically true. In reality, though, this is 99.9% untrue. It's setting up a falsehood in that sense. So it's using a truth but presenting it in a non-genuine way. So firstly, let's go to here's an aerial view of the Azwan quarry. I've highlighted the unfinished obelisk. Now, the unfinished obelisk was unfinished, still attached to the earth. So in any, you look at the stones that were moved, not the stones that are still attached to the earth and unmoved, because we don't really know exactly what the intention was. Maybe they bit off more they can chew. I want to do a dedicated video on the Azwan obelisk, but just to point out that as it is now, the unfinished obelisk, which is in the quarry, is 1 kilometre from the river. However, the quarry itself extends throughout that whole area, including right up against the riverbank. However, again, what's not mentioned in these type of presentations is the impact of the yearly flood that it had on the landscape of Egypt. So here we see at Thebes the Colossi of Memnon and how far the flood came in. There we can see on the right the flood coming up right up to the base, essentially to where the causeway of the Great Pyramid and the Khafre Pyramid, so the water brought right up to the banks. But there are also canals, so even in the non-flood times that you still would be able to approach very, very close to these sites. Now, for instance, about 5 miles, is either 5 miles or kilometres from the Nile to the Giza, to the famous pyramids, but canals. Now, here's an aerial view of Thebes, and there I've got the arrow pointing where the Colossi of Memnon is. 3 kilometres, 1.86 miles from the river, but on the left you can see how far all of that would have been underwater. So not just about bringing the stone down the Nile. If you time it right, you bring the stone down the Nile and essentially right up to the final location. In some places you would be able to float the stone in and just let it settle. So there's the unfinished. Again, on Google Earth you can find the elevation. The average was about 16 cubits, about 8 meters. The water level would rise, and so most of the quarry there would be underwater. And so unfinished obelisk, 1 kilometre in the dry and 300 meters, 1/5 of a mile from the river at that high point. Now, however, at Azwan we find the evidence of canals linking across the site, so you don't even have to wait for the flood. You would still they built canals and you could bring it to the river even during the lower points, and at certain times of the year the parts of the quarry would have been flooded. Build a barge around your stone, wait for the river to lift, no lifting required, the water does it for you. And then we go, here's an aerial view of the Giza Plateau, the Great Pyramid. So that yellow line is 500 meters as a crow flies. There's the old Great Pyramid causeway. When the flood comes, tiny little distance now to transport it up, and plus you have the ramp and the impact of mechanical advantage. So technically 900 kilometers to move those stones. In reality it's less than a kilometer, in most cases half a kilometer, sometimes even less than that. The Nile current and buoyancy, displacement, the boat has to displace more water than what the stone is, and so shipping it down. Okay, now they really start to get into crazy land, deceptive, let's just say. So because they're talking about geopolymer, now for instance the passages that go down towards the subterranean chamber, they'll be in the later part, but they say that these were not cut out of the limestone, that it was formworked, that there was a great pit underneath where the pyramid is now, and it was filled with concrete, and that these tunnels were not formed. Now, how they do that, again, it's sophistry. So what they say is, this is a modern tunnel, this is an ancient tunnel. Actually, the one on the left is it's a mine shaft. Is this the best? Do you think really, honestly, that this is the best tunnel? You could just Google tunnels and find much, much better ones. So in that sense, again, it's sophistry, because I could say here is modern pottery, here is ancient pottery. We can't replicate what the ancients did. This is sophistry. It's comparing apples, not even comparing apples and oranges. It's comparing buffalo and plums. It's way off. It's ridiculous. It's deceptive. Theirs was in a production team with a budget and with staff and researchers. So I don't, this is a crazy argument. It is pure sophistry, fallacious. Next, so they'll bring up, again, this is a point, they'll bring up all of these points, and what they're doing it is to undermine and to create this doubt and then to propose their solution. But now, for instance, the Great Pyramid is aligned to true north within 0.05 of degrees. It's often said that this was never surpassed until modern times. There are very simple techniques to align to true north. It's quite, they got it quite well. Now, well, there are other details, but let's just, again, what's not included. This is just one of the Roman aqueducts, and even this is a low one. You've probably seen the pictures of these massive high bridges going through Rome and other places. They go up to 69 kilometers long total length, and it's not just the aqueduct, it's also tunnels carved through. Now, the grade of these aqueducts is 1 in 4,800 was a recommended. So pyramid, 230 meters, aligned to north along the ground. Aqueducts, 80 kilometers through the air. They have an angle of 0.012 degrees through the air. Not along the ground for 230 meters, but through the air for kilometers and kilometers. With ancient surveying techniques, ones we know, and the Roman surveying tools are exactly the same as the Egyptian ones, they were able to achieve these things. So it's not, again, they present this and go, well, how was it done? Well, ask a question, look for an answer first. So another staple of this is it's impossible to place a sheet of paper between the blocks. Well, that could be said for virtually every ancient site built of stone, or even more modern masonry before modern tools. We are still using primitive tools to get together. Place these. It's not even mortarless constructions. So this sort of paper thing, well, this is standard masonry, and actually, even though you can fit a piece of paper in between there, what also might be, I'll get to that later, the mortar in there. We've already looked at some of those pictures, but there are plenty of places where not just could you slide a piece of paper between the stones, you can jam your whole arm in there and wobble it around. These are the dressed lays. Common practice in stone masonry. Have your best stones on the outside, fit them very nice, and then you have just rubble on the inside, and that's how the pyramids were built. We'll see that in a moment. But again, they're presenting these points, but they're not really giving you the whole story. It's essentially lies by omission, but it's to paint and to build up their argument by using poisoning the well sophistry techniques. So we go back to this is the Great Pyramid. You can fit boxes of paper in between the blocks. After you get behind the outermost 2 to 3 layers, you have rubble is on the inside, massive holes. You can crawl through some of these holes, and so this is the type of masonry that the overwhelming bulk of the Great Pyramid is made. So it's like you're covered in skin, but that skin is a tiny little layer that makes up a tiny percentage of your volume. So the outer skin of a pyramid does not describe the pyramid, it's what's underneath the skin, and this is what it is. Roughly hewn blocks, larger blocks at the bottom, smaller blocks as you go to the top. So there you can see a picture of when you are allowed to climb to the top. You can see the blocks there, and then this is a later screenshot. Now all the time codes are there from the movie The Great Pyramid K2019. But all these giant blocks that they're talking about are, except for the ones in the Grand Gallery in the King's Chamber, are all at ground level. So if this is, was told in a more accurate way, you have to balance this. So smaller stones at the top, at the bottom. Oh, sorry, that's a typo. Smaller light stones at the top, larger heavier stones on the bottom. Makes sense. Essentially a child would work. Work smart, not hard. I'll put a link in the description. I did a video a while ago of the Great Pyramid and Khafre, what they are and what they are not. Essentially, it's looking at how they work, not the technique for their construction, but how they work, literally constructed. What is there to be seen? I got a couple of videos from Mike Haddock in there. And I also linked this video analysing the Great Pyramids in the digital age, where they can go inside the pyramid, and again you see it's a rubble construction. It's not all these precisely built blocks. There's a lot of mortar in there as well. Again, gypsum mortar is all over the pyramids. They are not mortarless constructions. There are mortarless parts, but a lot of gypsum mortar has been used in there, and there are gaps where you can crawl around on the inside. So underneath the casing stones, you get further deeper. You can behind the outermost two layers you see rubble. There's the bent pyramid, and underneath it's built in rubble. So they'll focus in on the the facing stones, but behind that it's rubble. That's how they were built. It's when you build a expensive dining table, look at the polish on the top and then go underneath the table and look at that underneath. What you don't see, craftsmen don't, unless you're buying a super duper version for royalty, they don't do their polish every part of the piece. So there's some more examples. There's rubble and there's mortar, bottom left here. Again, you can see, and some will say, but this was repair work. No, this is done on the inside. You would have to dismantle a large amount of a pyramid to get this gypsum mortar. It's on the inside. It is absolutely not later repair work. It is integral to the construction of the pyramid. It's built with mortar as well. So not just the Great Pyramid, but the other pyramid, where they still got the casing stones there, they are made with the same method. On the outside, smooth, tightly fit stones that form a skin, but the guts, the bones and the organs and all of the veins of the pyramids are rough. So this is how the pyramids were made. That was how they were covered over with the casing stones. So then they show these pictures, and again it's this mainstream Egyptologists say this, and they use these tools. This is, it's impossible. Well, okay, let's look. So again, they're going to they show the passage leading down to a subterranean chamber and that tunnel which emerges from there. Again, they're presenting this in a very, I'd say, dishonest way. There's no other, because what they're going to highlight the features of these passages, and in the later part of the documentary they're going to say that the bedrock beneath the pyramid was not there, that it was a giant pit and it was filled in with bedrock, and these tunnels were formworked, that they made, poured in concrete, put a mould inside, and that was how it was done. And to further develop this idea, they're going to present a lot of, how was this done, how was this done? You can't do that with those tools. Okay, so they present 4 problems, so especially with this, the smallest of the passages coming off the subterranean chamber. CO2, so as you go in, tight little area, you breathe out, it's like being in a box. If you don't have fresh air coming in, you're going to get poisoned. So these are all problems. Now the second problem is, what were the tools? Well, they're going to even dumb it down further. They show you a flint tool, but ironically that's a beautiful tool, excellent tool to use. And they say, well, how was it measured, and then how did they get the lighting? Now again, they made this is with production assistance and a budget. They were travelling around, filming, doing all these things. They had a budget. This is not some backyard production. Now, first question, CO2. How did they keep fresh air in there? Well, metalworking. So they had copper. If you want to work metal, you need a furnace and you need bellows. And we can see this, it's just absolutely necessary to pump oxygen in the fire to get it too hot enough to be working. The ancient Egyptians had pot bellows, therefore they had air pumps. That's all it is. They had air pumps. You can just, very simple tools. Now along the bottom you can see a couple of still in traditional use now to fire up the bellows and get the fire hot enough, the coals hot enough to work the metal. Bottom right you can see like not quite industrial, but coming up towards that period. It's a bellows. Now, again, traditional metal workers still using this. They don't have to, but they're being traditional about it. You can find ancient pot bellows, these jars with a little hole coming off the side where you can attach a cloth pipe, pump the bellows, and so on the top right you get your more traditional bellows. It's an air pump. Now there are ways with a few sticks and some cloth to make even those more traditional bellows, and the big ones as well. So air, not a problem. It's within their existing technology. Second is the tools to cut limestone. So we go back to the tools that they show, and I've also included flint tools. Here's a fact: cutting in limestone with copper or with flint tools, not a problem. Not a problem at all. Tools such as these are more than capable of doing it. Flint and dolerite tools are more than effective enough to be working granite. So I'm going to show some examples of this as well, Dennis Stocks, but also some others as well.
When I arrived, Dennis was just setting up a limestone block.
Very good, thank you.
The tools he prepared were surprisingly simple. I was curious to see how they'd used them.
Jack, come and have a look at this over here.
What have we got here, Dennis?
Well, this block of stone is similar to the type that they would use in the Great Pyramid, particularly for the casing blocks.
How did they get the block smooth enough to serve as a casing?
Well, to start to get it smooth, we would use a tool like this. This is a copper chisel, and the copper came from copper ore, which comes from the Sinai.
Dennis told me that the ancients used 3 naturally occurring materials: copper ore, flint, and sand. From copper ore, they made chisels, adzes, borers, and drills. I always thought that copper was a very soft metal. How can you cut stone with copper?
Now the secret with this is that it is hammered cold, not like a modern steel chisel, and that hardens the edge if it's left to cool naturally.
Okay, and then you can cut the stone?
Yes, it's quite simple to do. You just get the chisel, put the edge on, and then gradually chip away by altering the angle of the chisel in order to get a clean cut along the stone.
And that gives you a cut that's smooth enough to build the casing stone?
Yes, eventually you would get it quite flat. But then there's another technique they could use, which is using a flint scraper. Has a sharp edge along there and can be used like this. Just angle it at the stone and gradually scrape away the high points like so. Now, Jack, why don't you have a go yourself with this?
Oh, it's quite soft, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you can really just... and so with this thing, you just even away all the rough edges.
You can gradually get that even down until you get a smooth surface.
Work area and the size of the block they want to extract.
You have to stay at the same angle or you'll damage the chisel.
Copper is a soft metal that wears down quickly when cutting stone. So the technique is different working with these tools than working with steel chisels. But with these copper chisels, the work is extremely long and tedious. How did the ancient Egyptians manage to produce more efficient results?
Last year, I had the idea to wet the stone because I encountered big problems in my experiment with copper tools. I realized that there was a lot of salt in the stone. Because salt is soluble, I had the idea of wetting the stone to see if it would soften it up. We made 5 times more progress when we wet the stone. We realized that the stone is really crumbly. You can crumble it with your fingers. It is less solid than it was before.
So far, no one has carried out this type of archaeological experiment using water. And this
Now, so not a problem, okay. Got to include that portion in there. So the 4 issues, okay, not a problem, but established. And again, people who are producing a documentary asking for funds and poo-pooing other people should have a bit of, they've got a bit of responsibility to have done their research. And I believe they do, but they present all this in such a way that they suppress stuff that they don't want you to hear and then make it a problem. Okay, now third issue is measuring. So amongst the features that they point out is that the height of this tunnel only deviates 1 centimetre across the whole length. So it narrows by 1 centimetre from the opening to the end. And how was this done? Okay, it's called a stick. Pass me the stick. I measure the tunnel this big. They're looking for a problem that has a ready, easy solution. You have a stick, you set your height, and when you go along, if a stick doesn't fit in we need to cut off a little bit more, and when the stick slides in nicely, the work is done. So it's literally a stick is the solution to that problem. But how did they keep it level? Now we go back to the pictures of these tools. How did they use these tools? Well, these tools have all the answers that are here in the tools they show. Firstly, a stick for measuring. Piece of string would work as well. Tie some knots at the end to keep it, and to hold the string. You get the width, you get the height. You can even use it to get the diagonal, and well, it's not an issue. But they also show a level with a plumb line. This is to measure the horizontal. Here's another example of his tool. You lay it down, and the plumb line is going to always want to go down towards the center of the earth. It's always going to be straight. Never runs out of batteries, never gets miscalibrated. Perfect tool to use. That's how you measure level on the floor. Now, well, how did they do it on the ceiling? Well, firstly, if you get level on the floor, you use your magical measuring stick and guide that along. But you could use that exact same tool, flip it upside down, hang a weight from there. That's how you get level on the ceiling. You can also use the same tool to keep angles of the angled passages. So again, they go, well, how did they keep these same angles? Like impossible technology. How did they do this? Well, the plumb line is always going to go straight down. So you mark your tool, and you can get your angles. Simple as tools that were known to be used, work effectively all the time. So this is problems looking for. We have solutions, and they're looking for problems. Now on the top right corner, you see a plumb line hanging down. You don't see the whole tool in their picture. That's a horizontal. That's one for the vertical. So there in the yellow, we've highlighted them. And so if you want to keep the walls nice and straight, you use that type of tool. It's very simple, very effective, never runs out of batteries, never needs to be calibrated as long as you don't damage it. So they also show boning rods. So we have 3 rods of equal length. 2 of them are attached by a string. You stretch them out, and the 3rd rod you run underneath the string, and that will give you level as well. I'll show you some examples of these tools being used.
Is one thing, but how do you know when you've got the finished product? How do you know that your surface is absolutely flat?
Well, let me show you. First of all, they needed an accurate tool to test the surface as to see whether it was flat or not. Mm-hmm. Really, what it amounts to, if you just hold that for me, Jack, and stretch that out tight on the surface like that. Mm-hmm. Now, what this is are 3 rods that are all the same length. Now, this is extremely important, so that when the string is taut, you can check underneath the string with the rod to see if there are any high spots, like so.
So if we touch the string, we know that there's a bump right there.
Yeah, if the string lifts up like that, you know that there's a bump.
Unbelievable.
You place your end on that block there, and I'll try this block here. And we'll try your block first with the testing rod. Oh,
so that's
brilliant.
Pretty good, isn't it? Pretty perfect.
That's good there, but this is the bit here. How's this level here? Oh, yes. You've got to have nothing but admiration for them.
So they've got it exactly right.
Absolutely right. So the blocks are level.
Dennis had brought another ancient tool.
Now, we can use this A-frame to check whether the block is truly horizontal.
Horizontal like a surface of water?
Yeah, in fact, we can use the surface of water to check that the frame is accurate. And we do this by marking a line behind the hanging plumb line.
So if your measurement is flat, then this will always hang absolutely vertically. And then you know the rock is horizontal.
Yes. So how is that now?
It's bang on. It's absolutely right in the middle. It's very good.
Very good.
But that's one thing. I mean, if you know the block is horizontal, that's fine. But surely you also need to know whether the sides are vertical.
Yeah, that's right, Jack. But they had another tool for this purpose.
And there was only one place to test it. Now, this is one of the casing blocks that once covered the entire pyramid.
That's right, Jack. Because this casing block has to fit to its neighbour, the vertical face has to be truly vertical, and they could test it with this particular tool, which is called an F-frame. And by the way, this is the only place on the plateau that we can test whether a casing block surface is truly vertical. This is a simple tool. So long as this distance is equal to this distance and the plumb line is touching both the ends, then we can say that the surface is truly vertical. So how's it doing, Jack?
It's doing pretty well.
Then we can show that the surface is vertical.
Pretty simple, huh?
Well, they've got it right again, Jack.
But who?
So again, this is not a problem at all. So, fourth problem, lighting. Okay, now oil lamps were used across the ancient world, including ancient Egypt. Back in the, still now, if you grow up in the town or city, you're probably really bad at starting a fire. It's probably going to be a really smoky fire. Most people don't realise just to use dry wood to reduce the smoke. However, when people back in the day, when they depended on that, they knew a thing or two about fire, and they knew a little bit about lightning. You think they would have accumulated some knowledge. Now, the oil industry, now sperm whale oil was not just used for lubrication, but it was also a fuel which was odourless and smokeless, which was why it was expensive and why the rich people loved it so much, because it was also odourless. Now, you can use animal fats and other features, but they're going to smell like the food that they were cooked in. So, however, smokeless flame. Now, this is a common issue. Well, how did they, in these tunnels, how did they do the paint? How did they carve in there? They had smokeless flame. Natron plus castor oil makes a smokeless flame. That put that in your oil. People were working in the dark with lamps throughout all time. It wasn't until the first kerosene lamps came that people all of a sudden started working at night and doing things by night. They've been doing it consistently. And to do a smokeless flame, so people working in those tunnels wouldn't be overcome by the smoke, an air pump to keep the air going through, all in the historical record, problems that have ready solutions to them. So none of these problems do not have a ready solution in the historic record. These alternative ancient technologists just, either they're utterly clueless of this archaeological record, which they constantly ridicule, so they're like poo-pooing it, so therefore they know something about it, or they do know and they ridicule it to poison the well in the favour of themselves. And this is what this production does. It's setting up problem after problem that has a known solution to these, and they never present those. Wanted a problem for my solution, okay, or you bring up an important concern, but I'm looking for a problem that better fits my preconceived solution. This is how it's working. This is how it's done. It's emotive arguments, half facts, missing the counterbalance of these things as well. Now, this is a quote. So usually when it's written in yellow, it's a quote of it. Is this film fictional, far from being a scientific reality? Well, the movie The Great Pyramid K2019, and I've seen some wacky stuff, but this is the most of them, the most cleverly arranged and most unscientific thing, and complete lack of any sort of historical knowledge. But I would say it's deceptiveness. Now, they talk about limestone. So this is what they say: the extras detach the block with steel pickaxes, and they're going to remove a 3-ton block. But with copper pickaxes, it would take 10 years of effort to detach the stone. It would take 10 years. This is, now maybe there was a typo, maybe they meant 10 months or 10 weeks, but I don't, either case, either way, it is so ridiculous, so far removed from any truth. You just grab a block of limestone and rub it against the other limestone and watch how quickly you'll be moving. So to say in any time frame, even remotely close to this, to say this is how long it took, is absolute rubbish. Unexcusable, even if it was 10 months or 10 weeks. It's just like unexcusable. This amount of BS, if it could be harnessed, it could launch people into space. This is how much BS this stuff is. Alright, now I'm going to show this as well. So there's a great doco, Pyramid Builders New Clues. And so what they did, was they went out and they used copper tools and they started experimenting with removing limestone blocks. Now, they removed a single block because they're only there for, now, this is one of the problems with these modern reconstructions. To get a team of even 5 men plus the film crew, this is an expensive effort. So to go out in the field for a week, the money quickly builds up. So there's a limit on what's possible without serious funding to do any sort of large scale experiment. But what you can do is small scale experiments. Then you work out the baseline, and then you can work out if you had 100 people or 200 people and they're working for 6 months. You just run the numbers. But they used copper chisels and mallets. They did not use pickaxes. They used copper chisels and mallets. Now, after some experimenting, they realized, well, if we just pour water on the top, the salt in the limestone dissolves and it increases speed. They got up at, so they're estimating about 4 days to get a block like this using small hand chisels and mallets, not pickaxes. They didn't experiment with flint tools and larger, it's like you can use a little hammer or you can use a sledgehammer. There's a difference. So they didn't even use copper pickaxes. They were just using hand chisels, and they were experimenting and learning as they went along the way. So you have to include, the experience. And these workers weren't, they're not under the whip, let's say. Now they were able to successfully remove it, and also note that to get it out, they undercut it partially, and then they used levers to break it out. All right, but important thing to note is that once you remove the first block, so people say, oh well, it took them, they're estimating 4 days to do a block like this. Well, yes, okay, but that's the first block. Once you've cut the first block, you've already faced the blocks on either side. Once you cut the first row, you faced all of that block behind. Now, then you can start to use other techniques. So once you cut out the first blocks and then you cut a trench, most of the work is now already done for you. Now, they chose this block, and we go back to the underside of it. They didn't find the seam. They cut the block out from a large piece of stone, let's say, but they didn't find the seam. So if we go to a place here, so like this quarry right next to the Quarries pyramid, and you can see the Great Pyramid in the background. You can see where blocks have been removed on the floor. But what you have to pay attention to is that there are strata there. There are levels in the stone where the stone will naturally split even quicker. So once you've cut the first block, you've already faced those on either side. Once you've cut the first row, you've faced the entire row. Then you can just cut out the first block, and then you can start splitting them off. And so you don't have to cut them out. It's just getting the quarry ready is the hard part. Once the quarry is in motion and you take advantage of the seams that are naturally there, and these strata, these levels of stone, correspond to the height of many of the blocks found at the pyramid. Work smart, not hard. So nature's done part of the work for you, and once you cut the first block, you can start to just work off there, plan and prepare. And always, like this saying, always choose a lazy person to do a hard job, because a lazy person will find an easy way to do it. So, if I was in charge of a quarry, I'd be, hey boys, let's save ourselves a whole lot of work, and let's do this smart. Let's use the seams. Once we've cut a block, let's take advantage of that work that's already been done and build up from there, and we'll start chewing through this stuff. Okay, so again, there was a document, so that Papyrus of Mera, which talks about moving stones to the Giza Plateau. In this documentary, they found a boat, portions of a boat that was still in a cave, and they rebuilt this boat. Now again, in the documentary, the boat was built with care and fidelity, and almost sank with a block. But they say with care and fidelity the boat was built. Well, actually, yes, okay, but the boat was built by a person who'd never built that type of boat. It's not nailed together. They made planks and they tied the boat together. That's the old style of building, that's as they can be found. So the person who built them had never built that before. And you can see that they had to learn on the job, because the boat quickly filled up with water because they didn't realize, because they're so used to the modern techniques, that you actually have to sink the boat, let the wood swell up, and then it joins the joints and the joints get filled together as the wood swells. This was a common technique not too long ago for Viking ships, that type of stuff, who had a similar construction technique. You have to sink the boat, let it swell up with water, and then it makes the seam. So they're not working. They're working on modern, and they have to find the answers. And how did the ancients do it? Now, firstly, this boat with a 3-ton block, and that's, well, how did they move a 22-ton block? Because this boat almost struggled under 3 tons. Think about that for a moment. So it can't be done because this small boat had a problem with a 3-ton block. Well, build a friggin' bigger boat or a barge, and they had those, lots of them. They're painted on the walls, and not only that, we see the rigging in the sails, which shows that they had they knew how to rig, and so they knew how to lift as well. But this is not presented, and it's like sophistry. It's like finding a problem where a ready solution exists. I want a problem because we've got a solution. I'll cover this later, again, when I talk about the Unfinished Obelisk. I'm going to do that separately. But 1 cubic meter of water weighs approximately 1,000 kilograms. 1 cubic meter of granite weighs 2,600 kilograms. Have you ever heard of the term eureka? So with the discovery of water displacement, the amount of water that a boat displaces has to be more than what the weight of a stone is. So you get a simple ratio, 2.6. So if you put an obelisk inside a barge, that area in the barge, the rest of it, not where the obelisk, it has to be 2.6 the volume. So essentially, building a barge, has any room around the outside and a little bit underneath, because they got the layers. That's all it takes. It doesn't take much the boat doesn't have to be much bigger in size compared to the size of a weight being transported. I'll do this one as well because, again, when you see a lot of these reconstructions, 40 men struggling to drag a 2-ton block from the port to the site. I'll include this later because you see old examples of granite masons and loggers moving very heavy weights, and they just knew a few little tricks. And again, it's unfortunate that a lot of these done for TV productions, have a small budget, a short window, and it's so often the case that they don't go and find a traditional craftsman or someone who works in the field, more that the PhD, wants to run the show. And very often he's not very experienced in these type of things. But again, moving a 2-ton block, nothing. Traditional, even in the age of photography, you see people moving and manipulating these blocks in the old days with very simple techniques. So 10 tons, same thing. They mentioned Herodotus and the cranes. Now, this is also now an interesting point because Herodotus was told by the Egyptians that they used cranes. Now, this is the irony, is that when an Egyptian tells us that Khufu built a pyramid or that they used cranes, this is But when the same Egyptians say that there was an age of the gods 30,000 years ago, well, we must listen to the Egyptian. How dare they not take account of traditional knowledge? And but okay, that's the side point. Now, ramp theories. So let's look at those. This is again, the problem is among all these theories, none have been tested in real life. Not even a simple trial of hoisting 2 stones 10 meters high. Well, okay, rubbish, absolute nonsense. Now, the use of levers, ramps, simple machines have been tested so many times that there are precise formulas to work out to predict the forces required. These things have been tested to death. It is the things you learn in high school physics. Unless they're implying that the physics changed for limestone, the physics are different, or on the Giza Plateau, somehow some sort of gravitational anomaly where everything just increases in power. No, so again, this is absolute rubbish, but cringe rubbish. Now on that theme, so ramp theories, all the ramps that they show are on a shallow angle, but even a steep ramp still gives a significant mechanical advantage. So again, a lot of these people, not all, presenting these theories in regards to ramps, and they have to, it can only be 10 degrees, and so we need a mile-long ramp. No, it doesn't. Even a short, stubby ramp gives you a mechanical advantage. So I think so. A lot of them, they're not really too cluey in sort of, I'm sure they read their hieroglyphs really well, but they don't know the mechanical side of these things too well. You don't have to be a PhD in engineering to know these. You just go, talk to a farmer or someone who, well, they know it. So, but speaking of that, well, there is another ramp theory which could be of interest, and that is that the pyramid itself is a ramp which gives significant mechanical advantage. So once you've built, and as Mike Haddock shows, they built with the casing stones on the outside and then they infilled it with rubble. Still the same technique used today. Start on the outside and then fill the inside with rubble. And so as the pyramid goes up, you have your casing stones which provide a ramp. And let's look at an example of the Egyptian hoist. So where Wally Wallington, famous for moving giant stones all on his own, creating a replica of Stonehenge, one man, and Wally Wallington doesn't even use even a simple pulley made of a trucker's hitch. He's doing it on like the most basic principles, levers, and he does these things. But in this the Egyptian hoist example, here he makes a ramp, and the ramp is the angle of a pyramid, and he calculated by this technique 400 workmen could complete all the hoisting in less than 2 years.
And now I'd like to show you a demonstration of my Egyptian hoist. I call it my Egyptian hoist, or that's what I refer to it as, because I use the two angles of the Great Pyramid. The interior angle is 26-degree angle. It's just a simple 1 unit of rise and 2 units of run. The other angle is the outside angle I use from a ramp to hoist the blocks on. It's just a simple 3, 4, 5. It's close to 52 degrees. The 3 units of run, 4 units of rise, and the diagonal is 5 units. You also notice too a simple roller I placed to the top. This to redirect power. This 100-pound weight that I found I could hoist alone at the speed of 10 vertical feet in 6 seconds. This creates over half a horsepower. The other weight I'm working with here in my demonstration is this 505-pound block. I made this up to demonstrate what 3 men could do on the hoist, and I also included some fulcruments on it so I can move it around. The block weighs 505 pounds, and I found out that 3 of us could hoist at 10 vertical feet in 4 seconds. It's creating about 2 1/4 horsepower. 30 men, instead of 3, could hoist over a 5,000-pound block at this speed.
So just running by the numbers, what he can do on his own. So you can 2 men do the same, do double, etc. So yes, see, these not only is the physics of ramps and levers and this like done to death, tested, like beyond but even other examples of where just like with these people who go out and like cut stone and drill holes, like I've repeated their experiments, but they went out and did it and they solved it. There's solutions to there, but you won't hear these mentioned amongst this type of alternative community. And I'm an alternative guy. I'm a fringe alternative guy myself. But I there's a different, just because you're alternative doesn't mean you live in a fact-free zone. All right, so I'll put that example there. Now we come to the next. I'm just going through them in order. So next we see, no one knows where the stone was quarried from. There, or there. Well, that's one quarry site essentially. These are 500 meters away from one another. So if I go to a quarry, and then I go 500 meters further down the quarry. Again, this is just, especially the way you hear it, it's like, is it there or there or there? It's sophistry there. It's essentially it's like a cheap form of mind control used by those huckster preachers and stuff like that, snake oil merchants. And ramp of John Pierre. So even with that steep, using the pyramid as a steep ramp, now a ramp such as this, which doesn't have to be a mile long, that would be more, so to get your really heavy stones into the Grand Gallery and into the King's Chamber, small ramp like that would do. It doesn't even have to be that height, and there is actually evidence of a ramp linking the Caffrey to there as well, and you don't need stone. Crushed, compacted earth will support that. So that's another thing. You need stone or steel, or the ramp would collapse under its own weight. Absolute rubbish. There are such things called hills and mounds, and they don't collapse. It's just silly. Okay. Next part is, we'll do this in the next one, because when they talk about lifting and moving techniques, it's cringe. Like 50 kilos per man is more realistic, otherwise he would collapse. So this is dragging. Think of you see people in tug-of-war competitions, you see in poorer parts of the world children walking around carrying big sacks of rocks, perched on their head in bags and stuff. So this 50 kilo per man, that's like a deadlift, okay, but not pulling. If you're pulling with your legs, putting your back into it, you're doing a hell of a lot more than 50 kg against poisoning the well. We'd have to do the lifting separately, but so when they talk about stones such as this, well, how did they move these in a boat? Because they showed that little boat that struggled with 3 tons. Well, the boat doesn't have to be much bigger than what the stone is to carry it. It's water displacement. So when they go, well, the absurdity continues with which boat? Well, what about one of the barges that they freaking depict in the old tombs as well? And the oxen as well. So they come to the 1,200 ton, like the Unfinished Obelisk. I'm going to do this separately, because you just look at the example of a thunderstone. You don't even need to lift it. The canal brings it very close. You undercut it, then you cut the trench out, and you wheel the thing out. But I'll do that separately. But so this is again one of the standards, and cringe. Unfortunately, this is actually in the Baalbek Museum, which is I think very sad. But to move the stone of the pregnant mother, which is equivalent weight, 1,200 ton, to that one, they show this is what the cranes you will need to lift them. This is what modern technology, this is rubbish, is absolute rubbish. Literally Google 1,200 ton crane, same company, Liebherr, one crane could lift that. This type of crane, this extendable boom arm crane, is the worst crane to use. They are good because you can drive them on a highway. That's why they have so many wheels. You bring them into site, set them up very quickly, do your lift, and the thing's gone. It can be in that day. It comes in the morning, is gone by the afternoon. These are versatile. They're not the best for lifting. So just one crane could lift that. One crane from the same company. Okay, there are many different types of cranes. Most of them you'll see, like the construction cranes, are not depicted. A tower, well, that's a tower crane up there, but the way you build your crane design with exactly the same power input and exactly the same pulleys and gearing, you can lift a lot more just by changing the design of a crane. So here we see a boom crane with this long arm coming. So grab a weight like a dumbbell and lift it up and keep it next to your body. Okay, you're going to lift a lot more. Take that same dumbbell and see if you can hold it out. Extend your arm outwards. The further you go away from the centre of gravity, the more you want to fall over. So that's why these cranes, they're versatile, they can move stuff around, but they're not really good for the heavy lifting. You can take this exact same crane, reconfigure it into a gantry hoist or a hoist crane or a gantry crane such as this. It lifts over the centre of gravity. There are gantry cranes, modern ones, that could lift the entire Baalbek complex, all the trilithons, including the unfinished stones in the quarry. And there's bigger cranes than that. So this thing of like, oh, modern cranes struggle, absolute nonsense. Absolute nonsense. However, it's so much BS. You launch yourself to the moon if they could harness this level of fuel. Manual chain hoists, not attached to a motor, not plugged in, not anything like that. Just a guy pulling on a crane, off the shelf. You get 100-ton crane hoist, which means 12 people on their own pulling on a chain could lift that block. That's modern technology, and the fact is that all modern lifting technology is based on ancient lifting technology, which comes essentially from sail ships and sail rigging. So 12 people could operate 12 chain hoists and lift this up. Probably in reality you'd have 2 people on the hoist, or one really strong guy, but 2 people would be... So in 12 could do it, 24 people could comfortably lift that with no motor, electricity, anything attached to it. That's modern lifting. You don't even need, firstly, you don't need this many cranes, and you don't even need a crane. You need just a small bunch of people, and these are modern versions of ancient technology. The myths of modern lifting equipment, this just needs to die. This needs to go away. What they need to be is looking at ancient lifting techniques and materials. They've got to include that in there. But again, it's very important that they don't show those. I've done some videos in the past showing reconstructions of cranes, lifting giant obelisks with primitive technology. It's not just theoretically possible. People do it, but we just don't build in that way anymore. But if we did and we wanted to build with giant blocks, well, we've more than enough got the equipment. With manual equipment, we could do it. All right, now this is where they bring in the Benny Hill theme. They even say 8,000 to 9,000 oxen, but I'll do that in the... it is no longer fiction, but science fiction. I will do that in a separate Unfinished Obelisk video. But next they go on to, without having too much knowledge in physics, well, I think that should be the motto above their production company, because we know that 2 materials with the same properties will repel each other. So they're talking about dolerite pounding balls. Firstly, these things work. Multiple experiments have absolutely conclusively proved the amount of material that these things can move and how long. Now, for instance, 130 men, just using dolerite balls, not using any other technique such as fire setting, could carve the Unfinished Obelisk in a year. 130 men. That's a couple of standard work teams. More than what any king could, if you can get an army, you can get 100 men from your army and say, oi, start banging. But again, material, like, what is this? Materials with the same properties repel each other? Well, so when you see that video, the time code there is 21 minutes 48 seconds in. He's hitting with a dolerite ball, and you can see small flecks and dust breaking off each time he hits the stone. He is removing stone within each hit. Okay, but well, let's look at how Indian stonemasons cut slabs. So even people with a steel chisel working on granite, the steel chisel bounces as well, and they don't have similar properties in that sense. But that's how stonemasons work. You don't cut. No one just cuts through granite or limestone. It's about pounding, fracturing, breaking the stone into part, because stone is just a bunch of stuff that's glued together in different forms. But even traditional masons, when they work, still working now, ching, 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 bit by bit. That's how it's done. It's how it's always been done. Still how it's done. And again, the same thing. You see a little bit of spray, a little bit of dust coming off. That's how it works. And a lot of these alternative technology types, they get something, they work on it for 5 seconds, and they say, it can't be done. Well, no, it's like it's, you know, that would say that, well, the obelisk was made in 20 minutes. What's the point of this? Like not even 2 minutes, literally 30 seconds, bang, bang, bang. Oh, it can't be done. Just look at traditional, again, people working, beautiful work that traditional workers do, people working in quarries with traditional techniques. They do stuff and they do it quite well, but not included. Mohs scale. Granite is one of the hardest stones on earth, 7 out of 10 on Mohs scale. I'd just like to point out that 5 on Mohs, so mild steel, which is a good tool to be working also with granite, is equivalent on Mohs scale to window glass. So window glass is 5, limestone is 4, and copper is also about 4, 4.5. So glass is higher on Mohs scale than copper or limestone. This has to do with abrasive. So it's about rubber. It's like sandpaper equivalent. It's like, what would you use as sandpaper, not what would you use as a chisel or a hammer. It should not be included in that. But nowadays granite is only cut using a diamond tooth saw. No, it's not. Traditional people are still cutting granite in traditional ways. In the modern world, we use these because they're easy. It's low staff cost compared to the price of the machine. Everything can be explained with words, but how do you cut gabbro or trachyandesite? Back to Mohs scale, so talking about cutting. Like cuts like. Get a piece of granite, another piece of granite, rub it against one another, you'll see it's cutting, it's scratching in each other. That's when you're cutting stone, you're scratching it, breaking off small little pieces. So everything can be explained with words, yes, and everything can be explained by doing, like this is just one of those. It's like with lifting and ramps. This is just sorted. This is done. There's no. It's complete. It's a fact. So then I show a statue. How does one achieve these curves? How does anyone achieve any curves in sculpture? You chisel it off and then you smooth it off. It's not like incredible. This it's either zero knowledge or it's sophistry, like where they know, but how does one achieve these curves? Sinister music. Zoom out carefully. It's made of migmatite. Well, migmatite will work migmatite, so big deal. All right. No fewer than 30,000 of these type of vases were found in Saqqara alone. How many of those were not of this type of level? So they show you the really, really nice ones, but they don't show you all the rough ones which were there. And why are they not counted amongst those experiments? Like again, we even see there are tomb paintings which show how these vases were made. So that's and now the scientists against Smith, as they've got a sculptress who's working at these, and she's already made a couple. She's doing one in dolerite at the moment, and she's going to be successful. All right, now these are extraordinary, but they're also very rare amongst those collections. So these are like this is expensive. Like, give me something. It's like the difference between a cheap watch and a really expensive watch. It's just about grinding. Just grind it down. You could do the same with sandpaper. It's just a matter of how much time you want to invest into these things. And even the thing of precision and accuracy. Now, for instance, the Sabu disc, especially when you see the around the outside, you get better pictures. You'll see it's not precise. It's not small little, visible to the eye sort of deviations. Masterful work, really work. But it's the mastery comes in the patience and the care in the building, not in the construction of themselves. It's stone. You grind it down, chip out, and then you smooth it down, and then you just grind down till you get the finished product. Okay, now we go into the Geopolymer Technique. So what they're going to show later is not just the casing stones, but they're going to say that all of the stones in the pyramid were built out of a mold. And they're going to show this later, but that will be for the next part. And it comes to concrete and comparisons. Okay, that's about it. Now, but okay, Davidovich also claims that the colossi of Memnon, we showed earlier, are granite. The one on the right, where you can see the blocks, they're sandstone blocks that during the Roman era they did a reconstruction, sort of put it together, because like how was it damaged? It's called fire setting. You light a campfire, low temperature fire, you heat up the granite, you throw water on it, and it breaks the granite just like this. It was probably done, I think Diodorus even says it was Cambyses, but Cambyses went across Egypt breaking all sorts of stuff, and fire and iron, it's all it takes. Campfire, throw water on it, granite goes smash. But these, like, he even suggests that this concrete was mixed like dough rather than a poetic, because there's a description from ancient Egypt that they were made like bread, full of love. So, well, he's saying that they were poured. Firstly, granite or basalt forms from lava above ground, cools down. Lava below ground is called magma. If that cools down, it forms granite. They have a very particular chemical structure. You cannot reproduce. You cannot melt granite and bring it back to its original position. This is just geology. You can't do it. So that one, absolutely no. It's just because it's granite. When it comes to the limestone, okay, this will be in the next one, because this is all about the concrete and so on. But before I go, let's conclude this one. So, okay, later on he says, here is proof. They're speaking about the geopolymer construction. What he did was put a piece of wood inside a mould and stored it there, and he said, well, here is the proof. And then he goes to the pyramid of Meidum, and on the inside there you can see this beam which comes out of a stone there. So he's saying that that is impossible, that it had to have been formed in concrete. Comparing that to that. Now, the production assistant says, well, maybe the Egyptians simply dug a hole and inlaid the beam. No, it is not possible, because the stone perfectly meets the beam. Between the stone and the wood there is no mortar. Between the stone and the wood there is no space, not even to insert a pin. So firstly, that they couldn't do freaking carpentry. Like, how insulting do they have to be to these people? How many artifacts, quality ones, do they have to ignore? But let's go further. All right. So then they film the video. So the video, when I take a screenshot, doesn't come out quite well. So here they show a piece of wood, and they're in the concrete. So this is wood stuck in concrete, and that all the stone around it is concrete. Geopolymer. Screenshot from the video inside the Meidum pyramid. Firstly, notice there are post holes around the joint as well. Some go in deep, other ones are shorter. But this is from the Giza project. High res, very high res from the inside. What do we see? Cedar beams and a clear difference in colour between the stone and the mortar, which is around there. Mortar was used in the Great Pyramid, in the Meidum Pyramid, and other pyramids. Been analysed. Gypsum mortar. It's not geopolymer. It's gypsum mortar. All right, but now, so whether this mortar around here was part of a repair later or part of maybe a restoration work, it doesn't matter, because he's already stated, but it's seamless. There's no mortar in there. That's his picture. You can see the same colour in there. This is not about being wrong. This is about being deceptive. This is about setting up an argument. That's what they do. It is sophistry. It is poisoning the well. And they haven't even really started for their main argument. What they've used is cheap cult mind tactics to undermine you. And, well, how did they do this? Oh my God, soft doomy music. How did they do that? But it's perfect. There's no mortar. You can't fit a pin in there. Well, they visited that place. So even they say in the video, well, a picture is one thing. Let's go visit the site. You can even see by the way they've edited it, the camera stops and then it starts again. It's a trick. It's rubbish. You can see the same cedar beams in the bent pyramid. On a side note, this Lebanese red cedar, which is imported into Egypt, large quantities. You can see there's sleds made of it, boats made of it. It has a crush strength of over 6,000 pounds per square inch. So there's not a stone ever in the world that couldn't be supported by this this timber. So it's on, and they had hemp rope. Hemp rope they had the wood to support the weight. They had the rope to support the weight as well. On a side note, and again, if you see the other cedar beams, you can even sort of start the ones up, like for instance here, that they're nicely put in place. But this one is this guy it's just rubbish. No, impossible. Firstly, people, carpentry, but you cannot. There is no mortar. No, there is. Yeah, F and oath there is, and they know it. They know it, and that's why they're sort of very careful with the angle of the photo, and yeah. So there's another example of creating things that don't exist. There's a difference between being wrong and there's outright just deceptiveness, and that's another example of that. So okay, at this point you get up to about 40 minutes into the video, which is 3.5 hours long. Essentially the first half is this sophistry where they present these false arguments, miss out key information before they present their own. And before I go, because their final conclusion, what they're saying about this, that the blocks were formed, you can just smash this. It's ridiculous. It's not only wrong, they know it's wrong because they've filmed it. The pictures they show of the pyramid in the very early, but so just setting it up. So this is how they work. So if you've sort of been impressed by this, just pay attention that this is actually very deceptive. Built on like really bad, really bad false facts. Not just wrong, like false facts, because it's, again, with a production team, surely they have access to a search engine, and they're just using the same arguments over and over and over again. There are many curiosities, many mysteries, but what they've presented here is just a load of codswallop. It's straight in the rubbish bin. It's cringe fail. So okay, part 1 over. We'll go on part 2 on the next part, and again just look at this very, very deceptive documentary. It's sophistry. It's poisoning the well. Because if you can arrange a production team to travel around and do all this videoing, you have logic, you have some sort of intelligence. So you can't be this unintelligent and lazy by accident, and yet still manage to do write books, make production teams, organise all of this funding and all the stuff that goes into it. All right, so there's your imagined problems with ready-made solutions, and next part, I'll do it soon enough. Anyway, have a good one.